comes to...
Well, let's talk more on the electricity sector as we're bringing now the Managing Director, Coleman Wires and Cables, George Onafowokan. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
I hope I got that right. I was practicing in my head. Thank you.
You did well.
All right, so let's get into the electricity sector. It seems that the president is also now paying so much attention to it. I was saying earlier, just yesterday, we saw a statement coming from the Ministry of Finance, as the coordinating minister of the economy, talking about government, looking the electricity sector being open for investment. But we've seen a number of grid collapse and power outages this season as well. What's your reaction to that?
And the unfortunate part of it is that, look, we're in this situation that I don't think, unfortunately, when you lack investment over years, electricity is not a solution that is an overnight solution. When you look at it, I feel sorry for the current government because they're inheriting what literally people did not look at or do the right things on over the last 2 decades. I said we started rightly when we came back into democracy by focusing on electricity and both the distribution, transmission of power, generation, transmission and distribution of power. But invariably, I think everybody just went to sleep after the first 8 years of the, and then we're all refocusing on it. The reality is, if you put a gap in electricity investment, the end result is what you're going to have. Grid collapse, insufficient power supply, imbalance. And I think the major part of it is the imbalance between what is generated, what is transmitted, and what is distributed. A grid collapse literally happens not because you don't have enough generation or you don't have enough. It's in between the actual generation and the power being distributed. When they're being transmitted, at any fluctuation between those variations, if you fluctuate it too much, in order to rebalance, it will either collapse. And in order not to allow it to collapse, what they do is shut it down. So that's really what is happening. Sometimes the grid collapse is really a grid protection against total collapse. Now, and the unfortunate part is that until we get it right in between what we are generating and distributing, which literally is that transmission end that is creating the big problem. There's like a misalignment between what we have generated and distributed.
When you speak, it will sound as though nothing has been done in the last 24 years or so, but we've had billions of dollars being allocated to the power sector, and we've seen one of them, was it during the Buhari administration, an MOU was signed with a German company.
Correct.
And they're still in the country at the moment.
Correct.
But we haven't seen so much, in that regard. So is it investment or just doing the right thing, like you said, paying attention?
Investment is one thing. Ideas of investment is one thing. The German $2 trillion agreement was a fantastic idea, and by the previous government. But unfortunately, implementation, the start off, unfortunately, when Kyari died, that whole process died 4 or 5 years, and it resurrected after 4 or 5 years of the man's death. And I think it's resurrected properly under this government. There's some kudos we have to give to whoever is doing whatever they're doing, realizing that the reality is government is a continuum. It is not about who started it, it's about how you end up getting it finished so that your people actually benefit from it. So, and I think that is where we're getting it right now, that we need to continue whatever, good or bad of it, look at the best part of it and move them on. Now they're moving it on. It's happening. The Siemens project has started. The key question we have to look at it from a manufacturing perspective and infrastructural perspective is, what amount of solution between the power generation, distribution, and transmission is localized? Now, when we don't have homegrown solutions to things, and someone comes from abroad and says, this project is going to cost us the next $5 billion. But nobody actually asks, which part of that $5 billion would it develop in homegrown capacity? Now, because the minute you start developing homegrown capacity, the minute you start solving your problem in the long run, because whoever knows how to solve the problem or actually implement it will know how to maintain it and then know how to strategically grow it. So invariably, grid collapse issues will continue for a little bit more time while the current solutions being provided by the current team, including the ministers. I've met the minister, and sometimes I feel sorry for him. And very nice gentleman. But at the end of the day, everybody looks at him as if he's the man that literally has created the problem. But unfortunately, he's not. He's the man that has made the problem. But invariably, the size and scope of the problem is met really is even beyond 8 years of another government. Now, but the question is, what do we do now to start solving it, which is what he has to do.
And I want to get to that shortly, because this is a problem that is also affecting the economy, the business climate, and I want you to get into that. One of the major conversations right now is the increase in telecommunications tariff hike. And for businesses, we know that that's going to take a toll on them.
It is.
But these telcos are also saying, look, we are spending a lot on diesel. And so I'm wondering, how can businesses survive when you think of how much you're expending on petrol and diesel?
I think this is where government has to also be. You just spoke earlier about the coordinating minister and what the presidency is doing. Now, this is where you need the manufacturers and the industrialists to actually play a part in balancing what you're trying to do. And what I mean by that is that, look, tariffs are going to go up. Subsidy has gone. Well, even electricity tariff is still going to go. Subsidy is still going to go, which means there's still likely hikes going to come. Now, the question is, what are we doing to rebalance the equation with the manufacturers to create more jobs? Simple things like fiscal policy of 2024 that was missing. 2025 is now on the table. We expect within the next 1 week or two, that's what the minister and the presidency is saying, it will be signed off. Now, tariff imbalance will come into play. Production should go up. Now, as production goes up, employment gets better. Now, the reality is, and let's be truthful, the private sector...
Let's get into that reality, and I'm going to remind you to state it, but we do have to go on break, and when we return this conversation, you will tell us what the reality is, and then the solutions to some of these challenges we're facing. You're watching TVC News On 1. We'll take a break now and return with more stories in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. You're watching TVC News at 1. As we speak, President Bola Tinubu is in Tanzania to unveil he will be unveiling an energy initiative at the summit. And the coordinating minister of the economy has also talked about the electricity sector being open for investors. And that's why we're focusing on that sector today. We've been speaking with the managing director, Coleman Wires and Cables, George Onafowokan. He's joining us live, or he's joining us live in the studio. Just before that break, I said, I put you on hold, and I said when we return, you will tell us the reality of things. So continue from there, and then we'll talk about solutions.
The reality of things is that the investment needs to be massive. We are not going to shy away from it, and I think the government has realized that they can't shy away from it. We're removing some certain subsidies. We're literally going to have to put in a massive investment into it. Secondly, I think the solutions also has to be complete deregulation of the power sector, which has actually started happening with moving to concurrent list the power so that states can literally distribute. But thirdly, I think we need to still come back to industrialization of that sector, which means from the cables being made in Nigeria to the ports being made in Nigeria, the poles, even the transformers needs to be localized. The more we can localize the solution, the better we actually can improve the efficiency of this power and the distribution.
Interesting you mentioned transformers, because I remember at some point people were comparing, I think it was meters being made here and those being imported, and people were talking about how the meters being made here were substandard. And then we've also had concerns about manufacturers of electricity equipment who have issues of substandard products as well. How can this be rectified?
I think it's a misconception. Now, the reality is, anybody that says meters being made in Nigeria are not, these manufacturers are part of man. I would totally disagree with that, because I know quite a few of the meters manufacturers, and I've been to their factories. Now, what you might say is that the amount of depth of manufacturing that goes into it might not be as far as we want, but it takes time, and they're doing better. Now, the question, I think the other part of it is that anything made in Nigeria is going to be more expensive, because if you look at the cost of actually manufacturing, the import on some of the materials, the duty on some of this material, you're going to have an added cost. That is also a problem for most people. Now, but when we actually take out those issues, the quality of what is being made today, when you look at it, we're in an industry, I'm in cable, where every Nigerian will tell you, go and buy made in Nigeria before anything else. Nobody will tell you, go and put any cable that is not made in Nigeria in his house or our house. Now, you have to get that into other industry. But perception, we need to take the perception of by actually getting, if you look at the number of meters we've been using, I have a meter in my house, it's made in Nigeria. The meters on the transformers I know are all made in Nigeria now, especially in the last 5 years. The question is, how do we get people to actually get to use them more? The biggest problem when you meet some of the discos or the transformer users is price. Now, the issue of transformers, we've had companies that have come into Nigeria to actually make transformers, but they start and they exit. So the unfortunate... It
boils down to the homegrown solution you were talking about earlier. Yeah. I have about a minute left, but I wanted to get you to speak to this. President is in Tanzania talking about the energy initiative. The Vice President was in Davos, Switzerland for the World Economic Forum, also talking about investment in the sector. In just a minute, talk to us. Can we get the right investment, and how do we get the right investment into that sector?
I think we can. If you look at it, we've been getting a lot of investment in even green energy. If you look at the amount of investment that's come over the last 5 years in green energy, it's in hundreds of millions of dollars, and they are happening. Solar plants, solar mini grids. The same thing is also expansion into different types of grids in terms of power, self-generating IPPs that are happening. We're using gas. It's happening. What we need to do is continue to create policies that encourage them to actually. But the best thing that the government can ever do to move things forward is deregulate and make it private sector driven. So from the transmission to the distribution, generating, transmission, distribution, myself or yourself should be able to start off a business today and sell to the locality and make it competitive. The minute we do that, we'll achieve the goal.
Thank you so much for your time. Very extensive conversation. Managing Director, Coleman Wires and Cable, George Onafowokan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.